Remove him from this plane, now!
My seat was medically approved. Stop! Nobody touches him. This entire flight is grounded.
Two airport security officers stepped through the open aircraft door and moved down the forward aisle of Meridian Skies Flight 618. Their dark uniforms drew every eye before either man spoke. Conversations faded. A woman lowered her coffee without drinking. A businessman across the aisle lifted phone, pretending to check a message while aiming the camera toward row 7. None of them knew what Marcus Reed had done. They only knew security had been called, and that was enough for suspicion to spread faster than facts. Marcus sat in seat 7A, the first row behind the first-class divider. His faded blue shirt remained tucked into clean work pants, though one cuff had come loose during the argument. A worn backpack rested beneath his knees. Under his shirt, a portable heart monitor gave another soft warning tone. Marcus pressed 2 fingers against the inside of his wrist and drew a slow breath through his nose. His heart was beating too fast, not dangerously fast yet, but close enough to make his hands feel cold. He held a small amber prescription bottle in one hand. The other rested against the armrest, steady only because he forced it to remain there. The older security officer stopped beside him. "Sir, we need you to step off the aircraft so this matter can be reviewed in the terminal." Marcus looked past him toward the open door, then toward the digital clock above the galley. Every minute mattered. The medical team in Seattle had warned him that missing the morning intake could cost him his place in the program. He reached into the seat pocket and removed his boarding pass, state identification, and the medical clearance letter he had already shown twice. "I gave these to the airline," he said. His voice stayed low, though breathing made each sentence harder. "My seat was approved by medical assistants. Please tell me what rule I broke." The officer glanced toward Aaron Pike, the ground service manager standing near the first-class curtain. Aaron's jaw was tight. Sweat had gathered near his collar despite the cool cabin. "Mr. Reed has refused repeated crew instructions," Aaron said. Marcus turned toward him. "You asked me to leave a medically assigned seat because another passenger wanted me moved." Aaron's eyes flicked toward the raised phones. "You were offered another seat and chose to escalate. I stayed seated." The answer was simple. It made Aaron look away. Across the aisle, Lena Brooks held her phone openly now. She had recorded enough to know Marcus had not threatened anyone, but the arrival of security had changed the mood around her. A uniform could rewrite a memory in seconds. From first class, Evelyn Carrington watched over the edge of her seat. Her cream suit showed no wrinkle. A gold watch gleamed at her wrist as she leaned toward Grant Miller, the corporate security officer traveling with her. "I asked them to handle this before he caused more trouble," she said. She did not whisper. The words carried into the next row, turning her private discomfort into something that sounded like confirmed danger. Marcus heard her. His face barely changed, but the muscles along his jaw tightened. He had spent most of his adult life learning what happened when a black man allowed anger to show in a room already waiting for it. So he kept his shoulders down. He loosened his grip on the medicine bottle. He breathed again. The monitor sounded once more. Claire Donovan, the lead flight attendant, stepped closer. Concern crossed her face, followed by hesitation. Claire knew Marcus's seat was valid, yet she hesitated. "Mr. Reed," Claire said, "perhaps it would be easier to continue this conversation outside." Marcus looked at her for a long moment. "Easier for whom?" Claire lowered her eyes. "Sir, please stand and bring your belongings." Marcus twisted the cap from his prescription bottle, but his fingers slipped. The bottle struck the armrest and rolled into his lap. He caught it before it fell. "I need 1 minute," he said. "My heart rate is elevated." Aaron took a step forward. "This is exactly what I mean." He continues to resist. Lena's head snapped toward him. He said he needs medication. Aaron ignored her. The older officer extended one hand, not touching Marcus, but making the next step clear. "Sir, we need your cooperation now." Marcus reached beneath his collar to adjust the monitor lead. His cuff slid back, exposing a long, pale burn scar running from his left wrist toward his elbow. At that moment, the cockpit door opened. Captain Samuel Cross stepped into the galley, his Navy uniform crisp, 4 gold stripes bright beneath the cabin lights. He had come out to learn why the aircraft door remained open. His gaze moved first to Aaron, then Claire, the security officers, Evelyn, and finally Marcus. Samuel's expression tightened as he took in the scene. Then he saw the scar. He stopped so suddenly that Claire nearly walked into him. For several seconds, Samuel stared at Marcus's arm as if the cabin had disappeared around them. Memory moved across his face. Rain on a highway, shattered glass, flames rising from a crushed vehicle, and a stranger carrying an injured man away from the smoke. Samuel stepped closer. His voice lost the authority of a captain and took on the disbelief of someone facing a person he had searched for over many years. Marcus Reed? Every sound inside the cabin seemed to vanish. Marcus slowly raised his head. The security officers looked at one another. Evelyn's confident posture stiffened. Aaron said nothing. No passenger understood why the captain knew the name of the man they were preparing to remove. To understand how Marcus reached that moment, the story had to return 3 hours, to a maintenance depot across Atlanta. He stood alone beneath the fluorescent lights of the locker room, listening to the last buses of the night roll into their bays. His shift had run longer than expected. A transmission problem on one vehicle had kept his crew working past dawn, and Marcus had stayed until the final inspection was signed. He never asked his team to remain after he left. The habit had earned their respect, but that morning it left him less than 2 hours before boarding. He splashed cold water across his face and studied himself in the spotted mirror. Fatigue had deepened the lines around his eyes. He removed his navy work shirt, folded it over the bench, and put on a faded blue button-down he had ironed the night before. The collar was worn smooth, but the shirt was clean. Dark grease remained beneath his fingernails, despite several minutes of scrubbing. Marcus considered trying again, then checked the time and stopped. He collected his backpack and left without going home. The drive to Hartsfield-Jackson took 28 minutes. Morning traffic was beginning to thicken, and every red light made his chest tighten. He kept one hand on the steering wheel and the other near the prescription bottle in the cup holder. For years, medication had controlled the irregular rhythm in his heart. Over the previous 6 months, the episodes had grown more frequent. Sometimes it raced while he stood still. Other times it struck hard enough to wake him. His cardiologist had finally referred him to the Cascade Cardiac Institute in Seattle, where a limited treatment program offered him a chance to avoid more serious damage. The acceptance letter had arrived 3 weeks earlier. Marcus had read it at the kitchen table until the words blurred. He had to report for testing before 9 the following morning. If he missed the appointment, the institute would give the opening to someone else, and the next review period was nearly 9 months away. Marcus could not afford to wait that long. He had spent 11 months saving about $2,700 for airfare, a modest hotel room, meals, and transportation between the airport and the hospital. He had declined offers from coworkers who wanted to help. He refused because his coworkers were supporting families of their own. Inside his backpack were 3 bottles of medication, a folder of medical records, 1 change of clothes, and a photograph sealed in a clear plastic sleeve. In the picture, Marcus stood beside his late wife, Renee, on the front steps of the first house they had rented together. She was laughing at something outside the frame. Marcus carried the photograph to every serious appointment. It did not bring luck. It reminded him he had once promised her he would keep living even when life became quieter than either of them had imagined. At the airport, he moved carefully through the terminal, conserving his energy. The airline's medical assistance department had placed him in seat 7A, the first row of the main cabin, close to the forward exit. The arrangement would reduce walking and give the crew easier access if his condition worsened. Marcus reached the gate with 12 minutes to spare. When priority boarding began, he joined the medical assistance line and presented his phone. The gate agent looked at the screen, then at Marcus's shirt, worn shoes, and old backpack. Her smile faded slightly. "May I see a photo ID?" Marcus handed it over. She compared the name, scanned the pass again, and studied the medical notation on her monitor. "Is this reservation yours, Mr. Reed?" The question was polite, but the doubt beneath it was not. "Yes," Marcus said. He kept his voice neutral. The agent called another employee over, and the two spoke quietly while Marcus waited. Behind him, a white passenger wearing loose sweatpants, a college sweatshirt, and rubber sandals shifted impatiently. When Marcus was finally cleared, that passenger stepped forward, scanned his phone once, and walked through without being asked for identification. Marcus noticed. He also noticed the way the agent avoided his eyes as she returned his license. He could have questioned her. On another day, perhaps he would have. That morning, the departure board mattered more than the insult. He slipped the documents into his backpack and moved toward the jet bridge. "Mr. Reed," the agent called after him, louder than necessary. "Seat 7A. Medical assistance approved." Several people in the priority line turned. Among them stood Evelyn Carrington in a cream travel suit, one hand resting on the handle of a polished leather case. Her gaze followed Marcus from his scuffed shoes to the backpack on his shoulder, then settled on the oil stains that still marked his fingers. She did not know his diagnosis, the reason for the seat, or what missing the flight might cost him. She looked at him for only a few seconds, yet something in her expression suggested she had already decided what kind of man he was. Marcus turned toward the aircraft and kept walking. Because Marcus moved carefully through the jet bridge, Evelyn and the other first-class passengers reached the cabin before him. She had already settled into seat 3C when he entered. Her cream-colored travel suit matched the soft leather around her, and a slim gold watch rested above one carefully folded hand. Beside her sat Julia Ames, her executive assistant, reviewing a schedule on a tablet. Across the aisle, Grant Miller placed a garment bag into the overhead compartment before taking the seat reserved for Evelyn's corporate security detail. The three of them moved with the quiet confidence of people accustomed to boarding before the cabin became crowded. Evelyn looked up when Marcus passed through first class. Her eyes traveled briefly over his faded shirt, worn shoes, and old backpack. Then she drew her leather handbag closer to her side. The movement was small, almost automatic, but Marcus saw it. He had seen the same gesture in elevators, hotel lobbies, and stores where employees followed him while pretending to straighten shelves. He did not slow down. Seat 7A waited just beyond the divider in the first row of the main cabin. Marcus lowered himself carefully, feeling the dull pressure in his chest ease once he was seated. He placed the backpack beneath the seat in front of him, removed the portable monitor from its case, and checked the connection beneath his shirt. The display showed an elevated but stable rhythm. He loosened the top button of his collar and rested his head against the seat. For the first time since midnight, no one needed an answer from him. He closed his eyes, hoping for 10 quiet minutes before departure. A moment later, he heard Evelyn call for the lead flight attendant. Claire Donovan approached with the practiced smile of someone managing several demands at once. "Is everything all right, Miss Carrington?" Evelyn glanced toward the divider. "The passenger directly behind me. Was he properly screened?" Claire followed her gaze and saw Marcus sitting with his eyes closed. "Yes, Mom. Mr. Reed has a confirmed reservation. His medical assistance request was approved before today's flight." Evelyn's expression did not change, but her fingers tightened around the handle of her bag. "I assumed the forward section had a higher level of control." Claire paused. The sentence had been carefully chosen. Evelyn had not accused Marcus of anything specific, which made the suspicion harder to challenge. "All passengers go through the same security process," Claire said. Before Evelyn could respond, a white man in gray sweatpants entered first class while speaking loudly into his phone. An oversized hard-shell carry-on struck 2 seatbacks as he turned. He left it partly across the aisle while arguing with someone about a missed reservation. Claire asked him to move the bag. He laughed, apologized, and continued his call. Evelyn barely looked at him. Marcus opened his eyes at the sound but said nothing. Julia leaned toward Evelyn. "The board call begins 20 minutes after boarding closes. Martin wants to review the overseas expansion numbers first." Evelyn opened her laptop. "Tell him I'll join as soon as we level off. Make sure they understand I need a quiet connection." She looked toward Claire again. "I don't want interruptions." "We'll do what we can," Claire replied. Marcus reached into his backpack and took out his medication pouch. A photograph slipped from the side pocket and landed face-up on his lap. He picked it up carefully. Renee stood beside him on the front steps of their first rented home, laughing into the wind while Marcus tried to hold a crooked "For Rent" sign out of the picture. The photograph had faded around the edges, but her expression remained untouched. He ran one thumb across the plastic sleeve. "Still going," he murmured, too softly for anyone else to hear. Then he placed the photograph inside the seat pocket where he could see it. Evelyn had turned far enough to notice the pill bottles, the monitor wire disappearing beneath Marcus's collar, and the old photograph in his hand. For a brief second, uncertainty crossed her face. Those details did not fit the version of him she had formed at the gate. He looked less like a threat than an exhausted man traveling with everything important to him inside one worn backpack. Instead, she watched him check the monitor and lean toward Claire as the attendant passed again. "I hope whatever is happening back there does not become a problem once we're in the air." Claire looked at Marcus, then at Evelyn. "His condition has been cleared for travel." "That isn't what I asked." Evelyn lowered her voice, but not enough to keep Marcus from hearing. "I asked whether it could become a problem." Marcus kept his eyes on Renee's photograph. The words settled inside him with a familiar weight. He had not spoken to Evelyn. He had not entered her space or asked her for anything. Yet she had already decided his presence required explanation. Claire hesitated, caught between correcting a powerful passenger and protecting the quiet man behind her. "I'll keep an eye on the cabin," she finally said. Evelyn nodded, satisfied by an answer that sounded like surveillance. Marcus leaned back and closed his eyes again, though sleep no longer felt possible. Beyond the window, ground crews moved beneath the morning sun. Inside the cabin, one woman's private suspicion had begun to gather the shape of an official concern. The overhead vents released a steady stream of cold air as boarding continued. Marcus adjusted the collar of his shirt, but the chill had already caught in his throat. He coughed twice into his elbow. The heart monitor beneath his shirt answered with two short warning tones. They were not loud, yet Evelyn turned immediately. Marcus checked the small display clipped near his waist. His pulse had climbed, though it remained below the level his cardiologist had marked as dangerous. Lack of sleep, cold air, and stress could push the numbers upward quickly. He opened his prescription bottle, swallowed one prescribed tablet with water, and waited for his breathing to settle. Claire appeared beside him within seconds. "Mr. Reed, are you all right?" Marcus nodded. "I'm stable. The monitor alerts me when my heart rate rises." He removed the medical clearance letter from his folder and handed it to her. "The airline approved the device and this seat before I arrived." Claire read the letter, then checked the passenger record on her tablet. The information matched. Medical seating approved. Portable cardiac monitor cleared for use. Assistance requested upon arrival. "Everything is documented," she said. "You're permitted to use the monitor throughout the flight." Evelyn had listened from the other side of the divider. "I don't want that device making noise for the next 5 hours." Claire turned toward her. "It's necessary medical equipment, Miss Carrington. The alerts are brief. Brief is still disruptive." At that moment, the man in gray sweatpants raised his voice into his phone. He was complaining about a golf reservation and speaking loudly enough for passengers several rows away to hear every detail. Another flight attendant approached him with a patient smile. "Sir, we'll need you to finish the call before the aircraft door closes. Give me 30 seconds, he said, waving one hand without looking at her. "Of course," the attendant replied. Evelyn did not glance in his direction. Her attention remained fixed on Marcus. The contrast left a knot in Claire's stomach. Evelyn's gaze dropped toward Marcus's backpack. "Are you certain that bag contains only medication?" Claire stared at her. "It passed airport screening." "That was not my question." Marcus turned in his seat. He did not raise his voice. "The airline inspected my bag." Evelyn kept her eyes on Claire, as though answering Marcus would place them on equal ground. "I'm speaking to the flight attendant." Marcus watched her for a moment. Fatigue showed around his eyes, but his voice remained steady. "You're speaking about me." The words were quiet. They still reached the nearby rows. A woman across the aisle stopped arranging papers in her lap. Lena Brooks lowered her phone and looked directly at Evelyn. Grant shifted in his seat, studying Marcus with the cold attention of someone searching for behavior that could justify a conclusion already reached. Claire felt the situation move beyond a complaint about sound. She should have ended it there. She should have told Evelyn that Marcus had completed every required screening, and that no passenger could demand additional scrutiny based on discomfort alone. Instead, Claire reached for the safer response. "Miss Carrington, I'll monitor the situation. Mr. Reed's records are complete, and there is no current safety concern." Evelyn heard only the final two words. "Current concern," she repeated. "So you admit that could change." "That isn't what I said." "Then move him before it does." Claire's expression tightened. "We cannot relocate a passenger with an approved medical seating request simply because another passenger prefers it." Evelyn leaned back, but her irritation had deepened. She had expected her concern to become action the moment she voiced it. Being questioned by an employee in front of other passengers felt, to her, like a loss of status. She motioned Grant closer. He leaned across the aisle. "I don't feel safe with him sitting directly behind me," she whispered. Her voice was low, but Marcus caught every word. Grant looked at him for several seconds. Marcus sat with his hands visible, the medical letter open on his lap, and a prescription bottle beside it. Nothing about him suggested danger. Grant still rose and walked toward the aircraft door. Near the galley, he spoke quietly into his phone to a ground operations contact. "My client has concerns about a passenger in the forward section," he said. "He has been watching our party and there is an unidentified bag under his seat." Claire heard the report and turned sharply. "The bag has been screened." Grant covered the phone with one hand. "I'm documenting the concern. You're changing what happened." He did not answer. On the other end of the call, a private complaint about noise became a report involving surveillance, suspicious behavior, and an unknown bag. Marcus watched Grant continue speaking and understood what was happening. Facts were being removed one by one until only the version most useful to Evelyn remained. The monitor beneath his shirt gave another warning tone. This time, nobody called it medical equipment. Aaron Pike boarded Flight 618 with 7 minutes remaining before the aircraft was scheduled to close its door. His ground operations badge swung against his dark blazer as he stepped into the forward galley, already checking the time on his phone. The flight had a narrow departure window, and one more delay could leave the plane waiting behind several international departures. Claire met him near the entrance. She began explaining that Marcus's seat and medical device had been approved, but Grant interrupted before she finished. "The passenger has been watching Miss Carrington and me since boarding," he said. "There is also a bag under his seat that has not been properly accounted for." Claire's face tightened. "The bag passed security. I already told you that." Grant continued as if she had not spoken. "My client feels unsafe." Evelyn turned slightly in her seat. She did not sound frightened. She sounded inconvenienced. "The device keeps making noise, and I have a board meeting during the flight. I cannot work while wondering whether the passenger behind me will become a problem." Aaron listened without asking Marcus a single question. He recognized Evelyn immediately. Her company purchased premium travel for executives throughout the year, and her name had appeared in internal notes about high-value clients. That knowledge settled the issue in his mind before he looked beyond the divider. Marcus sat in 7A with his medical letter open on his lap. His prescription bottle rested beside it. Nothing about Marcus matched Grant's warning, but Aaron chose the solution least likely to anger Evelyn. He stepped toward Marcus. "Mr. Reed, we have another seat available near the rear of the main cabin. Same fare class, same service. Moving you there will allow us to resolve this and depart on time." Marcus looked up slowly. "Resolve what?" Aaron glanced at the raised phones nearby, then lowered his voice. "A concern has been raised regarding the forward seating area. A concern about me sitting here, about the overall situation." Marcus held out the medical clearance letter. "This seat was assigned because of my heart condition. I need to remain close to the exit and within easy reach of the crew." Aaron took the paper and read enough to understand that Marcus was correct. The instruction was clear. Forward seating approved, Avoid unnecessary relocation, assistance required upon arrival. He handed it back without acknowledging what it said. I understand you have a medical request, but the seat at the rear is still available. We are asking for your cooperation. Marcus's eyes remained on him. It is not an equivalent seat. It is the same cabin. It is 30 rows farther from the door. Evelyn exhaled loudly from first class. Changing one seat cannot be this difficult. Marcus did not turn toward her. He kept his attention on Aaron. The airline approved this location before I came to the airport. Aaron felt the minutes closing around him. He imagined the delay report, the calls from scheduling, and the complaint Evelyn could send directly to a regional vice president. He had seen employees lose preferred shifts over less. The facts favored Marcus, but the consequences seemed more likely to come from Evelyn. "Mr. Reed," he said, allowing authority to replace explanation, "the crew has offered a reasonable accommodation. If you continue to refuse, I will have to document your behavior as non-compliance." A quiet change passed through Marcus's face. Not surprise. Recognition. The issue was no longer whether the request made sense. Aaron had turned it into a test of obedience. "I am following the medical arrangement your airline approved," Marcus said. "That is not refusal." Aaron straightened. "You have been given a direction." Across the aisle, Lena Brooks raised her phone and began recording. She had heard Evelyn question Marcus's presence, watched Grant reshape the complaint, and seen Aaron ignore the medical letter. Her thumb hovered near the screen for several seconds before she pressed the red button. She told herself she was preserving what happened, not interfering. Still, a faint shame settled in her chest. Recording felt safer than speaking. Aaron noticed the camera and turned slightly away from it. "We are trying to prevent further disruption." Marcus looked around the cabin. Passengers watched him with the uneasy fascination reserved for someone who had been labeled a problem but had not yet behaved like one. "There was no disruption until they asked me to leave my seat," he said. Aaron's mouth tightened. He walked back toward the open aircraft door before Marcus could say more. In the jet bridge, he contacted airport security. His report lasted less than a minute. "We have a passenger refusing to relocate after repeated crew instruction," he said. "The situation may escalate if we attempt to close the flight." He did not mention the approved medical seating. He did not mention Evelyn's request, Grant's altered account, or the fact that Marcus had remained seated and calm. By the time Aaron ended the call, the story had been stripped of everything that explained Marcus's refusal. What remained sounded simple: an uncooperative passenger delaying a flight. Inside the cabin, Marcus watched Aaron return and understood from his expression that someone else had been called. The monitor under his shirt gave a soft warning tone. Aaron looked toward the aircraft door. "Security is on the way." By the time the officers reached row 7, several phones were already raised. The older officer stopped beside Marcus and kept his hands visible. "Mr. Reed, gather your belongings and come with us. We can discuss the matter in the terminal." Marcus looked at the open aircraft door. Beyond it waited the jet bridge, another interview, another delay, and perhaps the loss of the medical appointment he had spent nearly a year preparing to reach. The monitor beneath his shirt sounded again, this time in a tighter sequence. He placed his palm against his chest and counted his breaths. 4 seconds in. Hold. 4 seconds out. The rhythm refused to settle. "I need a minute," he said. "My heart rate is climbing." Aaron stood behind the officers, arms folded. "He is delaying again." Marcus reached for the prescription bottle beside his leg. His fingers trembled against the cap. He hated that the shaking was visible. It gave the people watching another detail to interpret without context. The younger officer noticed the medical letter on Marcus's lap and hesitated. "Is that related to your condition?" "Yes." Marcus finally loosened the cap. "The airline has the full record." Aaron spoke before the officer could ask more. "We have already reviewed it." The passenger was offered a reasonable alternative and refused a direct instruction. His wording was polished now, cleaned of every decision that had brought them there. Evelyn checked her watch. "An entire flight is being held because one person refuses to cooperate." Lena Brooks heard the sentence clearly through her phone's microphone. She looked down at the video she had recorded. On the screen, Marcus sat quietly while Evelyn questioned his bag. Marcus remained seated while Grant described him as suspicious. Marcus showed his medical papers while Aaron barely read them. He had not shouted. He had not threatened anyone. He had not even stood until asked to reach for his medicine. Lena felt the old instinct to stay out of it. She had spent years teaching her college students that silence could protect injustice. Yet standing in that cabin felt different from discussing courage in a classroom. Her pulse quickened. She imagined Aaron ordering her off the flight. She imagined Evelyn's attorney contacting her employer. Then she saw Marcus struggling to open the bottle while strangers recorded him as though his fear were entertainment. Lena unfastened her seatbelt and stepped into the aisle. "He has not caused a disturbance," she said. Aaron turned sharply. "Mom, return to your seat." Lena raised her phone. "I recorded everything from the beginning." The cabin shifted. People who had been comfortable watching now understood that the moment had a witness. They asked him to move because Miss Carrington did not want him sitting behind her, Lena continued. "That is what started this." Evelyn's face hardened. "You do not know what security concerns were raised. I know he showed his documents. I know his bag was screened. I know he never threatened you." Aaron stepped toward Lena. "This is an operational matter. Sit down." An older man 2 rows back spoke before she could answer. "She is telling the truth." Mr. Reed has been calmer than anyone standing over him. Claire looked from Marcus to Aaron, then down at her tablet. She reopened the passenger record, though she already knew what it contained. The instruction remained unchanged. Medical seating approved. Avoid unnecessary relocation. She felt heat rise behind her collar. She had allowed a valid medical arrangement to become negotiable because Evelyn's displeasure carried more weight than Marcus's paperwork. "Aaron," Claire said, moving close enough that only the nearest rows could hear, "we have to stop. His record specifically says not to relocate him unless necessary." Aaron stared at the security officers, Lena's phone, and the passengers now watching him instead of Marcus. Stepping back would mean admitting his report had excluded the most important facts. "The instruction has already been issued," he said. "Mr. Reed must leave the aircraft." The monitor sounded again, sharp enough to reach the forward galley. Inside the cockpit, Captain Samuel Cross turned from the pre-flight checklist. "What is that alarm?" he asked through the interphone. Claire answered, her voice strained. "A passenger's cardiac monitor. Marcus Reed, seat 7A. Samuel's hand stopped above the console. The name pulled at a memory he had never managed to close. Rain against a highway, a crushed vehicle, smoke, and a stranger disappearing before Samuel could thank him. He removed his headset, rose from the captain's seat, and opened the cockpit door. Captain Samuel Cross moved down the aisle without speaking. The 4 gold stripes on his shoulders usually made passengers sit straighter, but this time authority was not what changed the cabin. It was the look on his face. He stared past the security officers, past Aaron and Claire, toward the man in seat 7A, as though a memory had stepped out of the past and taken a seat on his aircraft. Marcus had just taken the emergency dose his cardiologist had prescribed and was adjusting the monitor lead beneath his collar. His fingers still trembled. As he raised his arm, his shirt cuff slid toward his elbow, revealing the pale, uneven scar along the inside of his left forearm. Samuel stopped. 6 years disappeared. In his mind, Samuel saw Interstate 85 as Daniel had described it, hard rain, flashing emergency lights, and smoke rolling across the highway. Daniel Cross, Samuel's younger brother, had been driving home from a late shift when another vehicle lost control and struck the side of his sedan. Daniel's car spun across 2 lanes, hit the barrier, and rolled onto the passenger side. The front doors jammed. His right leg was trapped beneath the dashboard, and the seatbelt had locked across his chest. When smoke began entering through the vents, Daniel tried to break the rear window with his elbow. He could barely move. Drivers stopped at a distance as smoke rose from the car. Marcus pulled over his maintenance truck, grabbed a glass hammer and utility blade, and ran into the rain. He struck the rear window until it broke, covered his face with one arm, and crawled through the opening. Inside, the smoke was thick enough to hide Daniel's face. Marcus cut the belt, pushed twisted metal away from Daniel's injured leg and dragged him toward the broken window. By the time he pulled Daniel onto the wet pavement, flames had begun licking beneath the hood. Marcus carried him several yards before the front of the car caught fire. The heat burned through Marcus's sleeve and left the scar Samuel was now seeing beneath the cabin lights. At the hospital, Marcus gave only his first name, declined to speak with reporters, and left after his arm was treated, before Samuel arrived from an overnight flight. Daniel remembered only a first name, a city maintenance jacket, and the voice of a stranger telling him to stay awake. Samuel spent years making calls, checking old incident records, and asking city departments for help. He never found the man. Now Marcus sat before him with medication in one hand while two officers waited to remove him because a wealthy passenger had decided his presence felt wrong. "Marcus Reed," Samuel said. Marcus lifted his head. "Yes," Samuel removed his cap. "I'm Samuel Cross. Daniel Cross is my brother." Recognition moved across Marcus's tired face. Daniel made it. The gesture was quiet, yet every passenger near the front saw it. He stepped around the security officer and stopped beside Marcus. His eyes dropped briefly to the scar, then returned to Marcus's face. "My brother is alive because of you." Marcus looked down as if the attention made him uncomfortable. "I was there," he said. "Anyone should have helped." Samuel's mouth tightened. Daniel had told him how many people stood beneath umbrellas that night, watching smoke pour from the car while they waited for someone else to move first. "But you did," he said. Samuel placed one hand on Marcus's shoulder, then pulled him into an embrace. Marcus remained still for a moment before returning it with his free arm. Around them, the cabin fell silent. Lena lowered her phone slightly. Claire pressed her lips together, fighting the shame rising behind her eyes. One of the security officers stepped back. Aaron's face lost the certainty it had carried minutes earlier. Evelyn remained seated, but the color had drained from her expression. Samuel released Marcus and turned toward the passengers. His voice was controlled, though emotion roughened its edges. 6 years ago, a car began burning on a highway outside Atlanta. My brother was trapped inside. This man broke through the rear window, climbed into the smoke, and pulled out someone he had never met. Samuel did not call Marcus brave. He did not need to. The scar, the silence, and the medicine still trembling in Marcus' hand said enough. Marcus had not changed in the last minute. He had been the same man when Evelyn pulled her bag closer, when Grant called him suspicious, and when Aaron reduced his medical needs to non-compliance. Only the cabin's willingness to see him had changed. Samuel did not raise his voice or demand a full account in front of the cabin. He had spent decades in aviation and knew that long explanations often gave people room to hide inside polished language. The truth before him required only a few direct questions. He turned to Claire. She stood beside the first-class divider with her tablet held against her chest. Her face had lost its train service smile. "Is Mr. Reed's ticket valid, and was seat 7A assigned to him?" Samuel asked. Claire looked at Marcus, then at the passenger record glowing on her screen. "Yes, Captain." Samuel gave a small nod. "Was his cardiac monitor approved, along with the request that he remain near the forward exit?" Claire's fingers tightened around the tablet. She had read those instructions several times. Each time, she had allowed someone else's discomfort to matter more. "Yes," she said quietly. Everything was approved before he boarded. Samuel turned toward Aaron. The ground manager stood near the aircraft door, his shoulders rigid and his badge resting crooked against his jacket. "Then why was Mr. Reed the passenger ordered to leave?" Aaron opened his mouth, but no answer came. He glanced toward Evelyn, then Grant, then the two security officers who had acted on the report he provided. The flight was late. Evelyn had influence. Grant had used the language of risk. None of those facts answered Samuel's question. The silence carried every fact Aaron had chosen to leave out. Lena stepped closer to Claire and held out her phone. "I recorded it from the beginning." Claire took the device. The video showed Evelyn questioning why Marcus had been seated near first class. It captured Grant describing the backpack as unidentified after Claire had confirmed it was screened. It showed Marcus presenting his medical letter while Aaron offered him a seat near the rear of the plane. His voice never rose. He never threatened anyone. The only thing he refused to do was surrender the accommodation the airline had already approved. Claire passed the phone to Samuel. He watched less than a minute before returning it. He did not need to see more. "Officers," he said, "Mr. Reed will not be removed from this aircraft." The older officer nodded and stepped away from the row. His expression carried a restrained discomfort. "Understood, Captain." "We were not given the medical information." Aaron flinched at the sentence. Samuel looked at him but did not continue the confrontation. "All reports and communications concerning this incident will be preserved and reviewed after the flight. For now, Mr. Reed remains in seat 7A. Marcus leaned back slowly. The medicine had begun to work, though his pulse still struck hard beneath the monitor leads. Relief did not come cleanly. His body remained prepared for the next demand, the next question, the next person, asking him to prove what the records had already established. Samuel placed a hand on the top of Marcus's seat. "Take the time you need. We will not close the door until your heart rate settles." Marcus nodded once. "Thank you." Samuel turned toward the rest of the cabin. His gaze rested briefly on Evelyn, but he did not name her or invite the passengers to condemn her. A passenger's personal suspicion does not become a safety concern merely because that passenger has influence, he said. "No one on this aircraft may turn bias into procedure." Evelyn's face remained composed, but something beneath it had broken. She looked at Marcus's trembling hand, the medicine bottle on his lap, and the monitor that had sounded while she complained about being delayed. Until that moment, she had viewed every consequence through herself, her interrupted call, her discomfort, her lost time. Now she saw the man who might have lost medical treatment because she had decided he did not belong near her. She stood and walked to row 7. The aisle felt longer than it had earlier. Passengers watched, but no one spoke. "Mr. Reed," she said, "I owe you an apology. I did not know who you were." Marcus raised his eyes. He looked tired rather than triumphant. "You knew my ticket was valid," he said. "You knew my medical records were approved." Evelyn swallowed. "Yes. You did not need to know who I was. You only needed to believe what was in front of you." The answer landed without anger. That made it harder to escape. Evelyn looked toward the floor. For once, status offered her no useful sentence. She returned to her seat without asking Marcus to forgive her. No one applauded. The security officers left the aircraft. Aaron remained near the door, suddenly uncertain where to place his hands. Claire stood beside Marcus, ashamed of how long she had waited to defend what she already knew was true. The cabin settled into a heavy silence. It was not the silence of resolution. It was the silence of people realizing the man they had watched under suspicion had never been the danger in the room. Claire waited until Marcus's monitor returned to a steady rhythm before approaching him again. The aircraft door had closed, the security officers were gone, and the cabin had begun preparing for departure. Yet the tension remained in the air, quieter now but not erased. Claire crouched beside seat 7A so Marcus would not have to look up at her. "Mr. Reed, I'm sorry," she said. "I knew your documents were valid. I should have stopped this before security was called." Marcus studied her face. She looked exhausted, though he knew her discomfort was small beside what had nearly happened to him. He could have listed every moment when she chose caution over fairness. Instead, he placed the medicine bottle back inside his bag. "Next time, don't wait for someone with a title to confirm what you already know is right." Claire lowered her eyes. "I won't." She moved to the galley and contacted ground operations in Seattle. By the time Flight 618 began taxiing, a medical transport vehicle had been arranged to meet Marcus at the aircraft door and take him directly to Cascade Cardiac Institute. With Marcus's permission, Claire asked Seattle ground operations to notify the clinic that the flight had been delayed but remained scheduled to arrive before his intake deadline. A physician traveling in row 9 had overheard the earlier exchange. Dr. Helen Walsh offered to switch seats with the passenger beside Marcus so she could remain nearby during the flight. Marcus initially declined, but Helen assured him he would not owe her conversation. He accepted with the first faint smile he had shown since boarding. When the plane climbed above the clouds, most passengers returned to their screens and books, but the cabin never fully recovered its earlier ease. Several people who had recorded Marcus being confronted quietly deleted their videos. Lena kept hers. She understood it might be needed later, and she had already promised Claire she would provide the original file. Evelyn opened her laptop when the seatbelt sign went off. The board meeting invitation still waited on the screen. 12 executives were expecting her to discuss expansion plans, quarterly projections, and the future of Carrington House. She stared at the dark reflection in the glass, then closed the computer without joining the call. Across the divider, Marcus rested with his hands folded over his backpack. Grease still marked the edges of his fingernails. Earlier, Evelyn had seen those stains and assumed carelessness, perhaps even danger. Now they reminded her of her father's hands after a shift repairing industrial equipment in Ohio. She remembered how he used to scrub them at the kitchen sink before dinner, never quite removing the dark lines from his skin. Evelyn had spent years building a life in which no one could dismiss her because of where she came from. Somewhere along the way, she had begun using the same distance and judgment against others. The realization did not excuse her. It made the failure more personal. She took a sheet of paper from her portfolio and began to write. She rejected the first version because it explained too much. The second blamed pressure and fatigue. She tore that one in half. On the third, she wrote only what she could no longer deny. I looked at you and decided you did not belong in that part of the aircraft. Then I used my influence to turn that judgment into your problem. I was wrong. She did not add a request for forgiveness. Before dissent, Evelyn folded the note and asked Claire to deliver it. Marcus read it once. His expression did not soften, but neither did it harden. He folded the letter along its original crease and placed it beside Renee's photograph inside his backpack. He gave Claire no message to take back. When Flight 61E arrived in Seattle, a medical transport team with a wheelchair was waiting at the aircraft door. Marcus stood carefully, allowing Dr. Walsh to check his pulse before he lifted his bag. Samuel came out of the cockpit to see him off. Lena waited near the door. Marcus shook Samuel's hand, then thanked Lena for choosing to speak when silence would have been easier. As he was guided toward the waiting vehicle, he glanced once toward first class. Evelyn remained beside her seat. Marcus did not thank her. He did not owe gratitude for an apology made necessary by harm she had caused. The letter was not redemption. It was only the first honest step after a long series of wrong ones. Marcus reached Cascade Cardiac Institute before the intake window closed, but arriving on time was only the beginning. The procedure took place 2 days later. It corrected part of the electrical problem in his heart, yet recovery did not resemble a clean miracle. During the first month, Marcus tired after walking from his apartment to the mailbox. Medication changes left him dizzy in the mornings and restless at night. More than once, he woke in darkness with one hand pressed against his chest, waiting for the monitor to sound. He returned to Atlanta with restrictions and follow-up appointments. The depot placed him on medical leave, then allowed him to review maintenance reports from home. Marcus accepted reluctantly. Work had always given shape to his days. Without the noise of engines and buses moving through the bays, the apartment felt larger and emptier. Renee's photograph stayed beside his medication. On difficult mornings, he looked at her laughing face and remembered his promise to keep living, not merely remain alive. Progress arrived in increments too small for anyone else to celebrate. 5 minutes of walking became 8. 1 full night of sleep became 2. The monitor's warnings grew less frequent. After 8 months, his cardiologist studied the latest results and said the rhythm had stabilized enough for Marcus to return to the depot on a reduced schedule. His first morning back, he stood inside the service bay while buses waited beneath the high lights. The smell of rubber, metal, and oil settled around him. His crew greeted him without ceremony. One mechanic squeezed his shoulder. Another handed him a clipboard and said they had saved the most stubborn transmission report for him. Marcus smiled. A few coworkers had heard what happened on the flight, but none pressed him for details. He had no interest in becoming a symbol. He wanted to work, take his medication on time, and go home with enough strength for the next day. Meridian Skies completed its review weeks after the flight. The company confirmed that Aaron had called security using a report that omitted Marcus's approved accommodation and the source of the complaint. Aaron was removed from operational duties while the airline changed two procedures. Carrington House also removed Grant from Evelyn's travel detail after its internal review confirmed that he had described a screen bag as unidentified and exaggerated Marcus's behavior. Employees could no longer label a passenger non-compliant without documenting the exact behavior involved. Any request to move a traveler with medical seating approval now required a second review before security could be contacted. Claire helped write the new process. She refused praise from colleagues who called her brave. She knew she had not been brave when it mattered most. Her work afterward did not erase that failure. It was the responsibility left by it. Evelyn remained out of public view. Carrington House launched no campaign about fairness, and Marcus's name never appeared in its advertising. Months later, Cascade Cardiac Institute sent Marcus a letter informing him that the hospital had received a $500,000 grant from Carrington House. The money would cover travel and temporary lodging for working patients who needed specialized treatment far from home. The hospital would manage the program, and it would not carry Evelyn's name. Marcus read the letter twice. The donation did not erase what had happened, but it could help someone else reach treatment. Money could not undo the moment he had been treated as dangerous, while asking only to keep the seat the airline had promised him. Still, the gift would place other patients on flights they might otherwise miss. It was an action taken without demanding applause, and Marcus recognized the difference. One morning, at the end of his shortened shift, he opened his locker and found Renee's photograph against the back wall. Beside it lay a folded note Lena had mailed after they exchanged contact information at the Seattle gate. It contained one sentence, "I'm glad I stood up." Marcus ran his thumb across the paper, folded it, and slipped it into his shirt pocket. Beyond the locker room, tools struck metal and an engine turned over. Marcus stepped onto the service floor as a repaired bus switched on its headlights. The bay door rose, letting in pale morning light. The bus rolled past him and out toward the city. Marcus listened as the engine settled into a steady rhythm. Then he picked up his clipboard and went back to work. If Marcus's story moved you, like the video, and subscribe for more stories about courage and accountability. Which moment stayed with you most, and where are you watching from?